to another episode of Spectator Sports. We cover sports from a spectator's point of view. I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca, and in this episode, we'll be breaking down some of the major storylines across Week 7's action in the NFL and some of the major headlines coming out of NBA tip-off. But before we get into the content, please do us a massive favor. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We are on the grind to 400 subscribers by the end of the calendar year. So it would mean a massive difference if you could help us out in attaining that goal. And if you want to enjoy more Spectator Sports, we got that for you here on YouTube and our various playlists, as well as on TikTok. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio-only perspective, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link everything in the description, and let's get into this week's episode. Alright, let's talk about the Birds, because this was the kind of bounce-back game the Eagles desperately needed. Coming off of a mini bye after dropping 2 games in 5 days, Philly finally looked like they remembered who they are. Last week against the New York Giants, they were a team that was getting bullied. They were getting out-physicaled by Cam Scadaboo and Jackson Dart. That is kind of surprising because they're a team that were the bullies. They were the physical enforcers up front in the trenches, on the back line, and you got to see them run over team week after week. But instead against the Giants, it was the Giants doing that to the Eagles. But this week, the Eagles seemed to punch back against the Minnesota Vikings. The storylines heading into this game were great. Carson Wentz faces his former team, and for a guy that used to be the future in Philly, it's wild to think that it's been 5 years since he left the Eagles, and the arcs between him and Jalen Hurts have gone in completely opposite directions. Wentz, since leaving the Eagles, has kind of become a journeyman. He's bounced from the Colts to the Commanders to being a backup with the Rams and later the Chiefs last season, and now being J.J. McCarthy's backup, now starting a handful of games while McCarthy recovers from a high ankle sprain. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts ascends to being a top 10, top 5 quarterback, guides the Eagles to 2 Super Bowl appearances in 3 years, is an MVP runner-up, wins Super Bowl MVP as he lifts the Eagles to their 2nd Super Bowl title in franchise history, and now you get to see them meet on the same field at US Bank Stadium. Jumping into the game, the Eagles came out firing on that opening drive. On 4th and 4, Jalen Hurts improvised beautifully, pointing downfield to A.J. Brown to get open, and he dropped a dime for a touchdown. That's just backyard football between these two, as we've seen these two link up for many deep passes in the past. But after that, the offense kind of vanished. I mean, the only type of scoring that the Eagles had was off of Carson Wentz pick 6, where Jalen Hunt read him perfectly and took it back all the way. On that very play, Wentz never saw Jalen Hunt dropping back into coverage as he was under duress, with Jalen Carter barreling down on him, delivering an absolutely crushing hit to the midsection. Vintage Wentz moment where he held onto the ball for too long, tried to make something out of nothing and play this type of hero ball, and it cost him once again. The second half, though, it totally was a different story. The second half, though, offensively, it was a different story. The Eagles' offense woke up. Hurts began to dice up this Vikings defense as he found Devontae Smith, who went nuclear in the second half for a career-high 183 yards, including a 79-yard bomb on a day where he torched the Vikings secondary. A.J. Brown kept doing A.J. Brown-like things, and Jalen Hurts seemed to handle everything that Brian Flores threw at him. Every blitz, every disguise, every coverage. And when the Eagles were faced with a 3rd and 13 situation, when it was just a 2-point game, you punt, the Vikings could get into field goal range, and next thing you know, they take the lead for the first time in this game. But Jalen's able to buy time, get away from the blitz, and find A.J. Brown for a huge conversion. And later, when it's a chance to end this game, bleed the clock down to 0-0 as the Eagles are faced with a 3rd and long, Hurts is able to again evade the pass rush and dial up a dime to A.J. Brown, which ended up icing the game as the Eagles walk away from Minnesota at 5-2. I do want to credit this defense as well. I talked about how against the Giants they got pushed around by Cam Scadaboo and Jackson Dart and a ragtag group of receivers. But in this game against Minnesota, they shut down the run. I mean, Jordan Mason had little to no impact. They were in the face of Carson Wentz throughout the entire game. They forced 2 turnovers, took 1 back to the house. And in the red zone in particular, they just gave up 1 touchdown there. I think the Eagles defense held the Vikings to just 1 for 6 in the red zone, which is great considering that they are a pretty good offense. You have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. Despite all of that, they were able to limit them to field goals, something we've seen them do throughout the year. They're a bend but don't break type of defense, at least in 2025. I gotta talk about Carson Wentz for a second. I mean, seeing him across the field, seeing him in Vikings purple definitely felt a little strange. For a good chunk of my early adulthood life, I saw him get drafted when I was 19, 20, and he was a guy I used to defend every Sunday. I entered adulthood wearing his jersey every Sunday, believing he was the future franchise guy for the Philadelphia Eagles. But now, removing all that bias and seeing how his career has unfolded, it's clear that those tendencies we saw even with his days in Philly, he still hasn't changed. He still trusts his arm way too much and his athleticism like it's 2017. But his body just isn't there anymore. He takes a lot of hits. These injuries have begun to pile up on him. He's really never been the same since his 2017 season, where he could have been MVP if he stayed healthy, but tore his ACL with about 3 weeks left in the season. You still see him holding onto the ball for too long. He makes bad reads, and whenever pressure comes, he panics. And you saw that when Jalen Carter was barreling down on him. You just didn't see Jalix Hunt, and they make him pay for a pick 6. You could really tell that he wasn't just beaten up physically, that he's still quite in his head mentally as well. And meanwhile, I'm so grateful that the Eagles' decision to pick Jalen over Carson ended up being the right decision. The growth, the leadership, the poise, he's the real deal. And right now, I don't think anyone in the NFC throws a better deep ball than Jalen Hurts. Jalen went up against the league's second best pass defense, who came into this game having never allowed an opposing quarterback to throw for over 200 yards. Well, Jalen threw for 326 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no turnovers. He was locked in all afternoon, particularly in the second half, and the Vikings defense never stood a chance once the Eagles offense hit their stride, something we haven't really seen consistently this season. This game shows that the Eagles had the best wide receiving duo in the NFL. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith combined for over 300 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. Smitty in particular has been on a tear recently, and despite him being in the shadow of A.J. Brown, there is still plenty of times where he takes over a given game. Considering the circumstances coming into this game, it wasn't really a must-win scenario, but it sure did feel like one. After losing 2 straight games in a very short amount of time, they went from unbeaten to 4-2. The Eagles had to get this one, and they beat the Vikings, they beat up Wentz, and the offense finally woke up. Those are 3 major victories for the Eagles. I still have some concerns because the first half did run into some lulls. It was quiet after that opening drive, and I still have major concerns about the offensive line because they're still not at full strength as Saquon's struggles continue, and it's still not even his fault. I definitely think Saquon Barkley is healthy. I definitely don't think that the 2024 workload was too much on his body. It's really a matter of the offensive line blocking, and I think they did a really good job in pass protection in this game, but still struggling to generate any type of rushing lanes and create any holes for Saquon Barkley to really break one loose. The gains that he did have that were even moderate gains, they were taken back to the penalty. So I'm still waiting for the Eagles' running attack to pick it up a notch, but the biggest thing is for the Eagles is to get healthy. They have one more game before they enter the bye week. For anybody that's dinged up heading into the bye week, just hold them out, let them have an extra week of rest, and then they come back for that second half of the year to being as healthy as possible, what is going to be the stretch run of the 2025 season. Well, the Icy-Hot Bowl certainly lived up to the hype. Two quarterbacks north of 40, Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco, both trying to prove that they still have something left in the tank, and ended up turning back the clock to deliver a Thursday night classic. At the end, it was Joe Flacco and the Cincinnati Bengals who ended up on top, taking down the Pittsburgh Steelers in dramatic fashion. For the first time since Joe Burrow went down, the Bengals offense actually looked alive. After 3 rough outings with Jake Browning at the helm, Joe Flacco stepped in and completely changed the vibe. Joe Flacco looked like vintage Joe Cool, throwing for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns, including a game-winning drive late in the fourth quarter to give the Bengals the win. The Bengals' offensive game plan deserves a ton of credit. Play creativity got Jamar Chase involved early and often as he delivered a monster night, 16 catches for 161 yards and a touchdown. And plus, you even got to see a Joe Flacco read option. Yes, you heard that right. Where he kept the ball and picked it up for a first down. Somewhere out there, Lamar Jackson is probably doing a double take, as it was totally unreal. I want to give T. Higgins some massive credit as he came up with one of the smartest plays of the night. Intentionally going down instead of scoring a touchdown, allowing the Bengals to milk nearly every second off the clock for what would be the go-ahead field goal. This was textbook situational awareness. If he scores a touchdown, that's great for his stats and even for the Bengals, but that does give Aaron Rodgers a chance to go down the field and either tie and maybe even take the lead depending on how it shakes out. But T. Higgins does the smart thing, the unselfish thing, goes down, and then basically the Bengals are able to sit on the clock and they knock in what is eventually the game-winning field goal. Also, for the first time all season, we got to see Chase Brown look like his former self from 2024, who is an explosive back, but just hasn't had any type of daylight due to the poor offensive line play. Thought he was finally able to showcase how he can run hard between the tackles and provide some much-needed balance to this Bengals offense. On the other side, Aaron Rodgers actually played pretty well. Despite 2 interceptions, one wasn't his fault as DK Metcalf couldn't quite haul it in, and that led to an interception. But those 2 interceptions did turn into 10 Bengals points just before halftime, as at one point they were trailing 10-0 and eventually walked into the intermission with a 17-10 lead. I do want to commend though, Rodgers did look sharp coming out of the second half. His throws kept the Steelers in the game, and despite them taking a lead late in the fourth with a rocket throw to Pat Freiermuth, I want to do credit the Bengals defense who did come up with those 2 interceptions I talked about earlier and timely stops along the way, considering that they were without their star pass rusher, Trey Hendrickson. As for Pittsburgh, the concerns on defense were for real. The tackling was sloppy, there were several lapses in coverage, and TJ Watt was unusually quiet all night. This is not quite the formula you want against a now rejuvenated Cincinnati Bengals offense. With this win, Cincinnati moves to 3-4, keeping their playoff hopes alive, and with Joe Flacco under center providing competent, even inspired quarterback play, the Bengals look like a team that is not quite ready to fade just yet. Let's talk about what might go down as one of the most ridiculous finishes of the season so far. The Broncos' 33-32 comeback win over the New York Giants. Denver was dead in the water for most of this game. I mean, they were down 19-0 in the fourth quarter. The offense was getting booed off the field, and it felt like another long, ugly afternoon in Denver. But then, boom, out of nowhere, Bo Nix and that offense woke up like somebody hit a switch. Bo Nix went absolutely off in the fourth quarter, completing 16 of 25 passes for 174 yards, 2 touchdowns, and also ran for 46 rushing yards and another 2 scores on the ground. He was fearless. He was throwing darts all over the field, especially into tight windows, and giving his guys chances to make plays on the field, and they did. There was even a little bit of luck sprinkled into this comeback, like Troy Franklin's touchdown catch off a deflection in the end zone. But what matters is momentum shifts, and Denver remembered that they have the talent and played like it. Their defense got a timely interception to allow Bo Nix and the Broncos offense to cut this lead to 3 points at this time. You couple that with another stop, Nix is able to drive them down the field and take it in for the go-ahead score with his legs, and next thing you know, the Broncos are up 30-26. Now, there's still plenty of time, and Jackson Dart does a magnificent job of leading his team down the field with a little bit of help. There was a controversial pass interference call at the 2-yard line, and this sets up Jackson Dart's go-ahead touchdown run. The extra point, which was pivotal, was missed, and now this opens up the door for the Broncos not just to force overtime, they can walk away with this game with a win. Bo Nix does this thing again, taking advantage of a lot of soft coverage by the Giants defense, and next thing you know, Will Lutz is lining up for a 39-yard go-ahead field goal, which he knocks in, and they complete this unfathomable comeback. For the Giants, I think they'll be sick watching the film on this because they had control of this game. They were up 3 scores. They needed to close this game out by playing some tighter defense, knowing that you can't give up 3 points. But Brian Dable went conservative. For whatever reason, in these late situations, we saw this with the Bills when they gave up a field goal with 13 seconds left against the Kansas City Chiefs. You play this deep defense, and obviously you don't want to give something up over the top, but you can't just give up 15, 10, 20 yards. You have to make them work for it, and for whatever reason, they didn't do so. Additionally, when you have the poorly timed turnover by Jackson Dart, where he shouldn't even be in that situation, it should be some type of hot read there, or then him trying to audible to something else where it's a run play, make Sean Payton use his final timeout. That's a pivotal sequence there. And these all kind of accumulated to how the Giants blew this game. Again, I do want to credit that despite giving up the go-ahead score at 30-26, Dart did his part. He led them down the field for the go-ahead score. That should have been the game-winning touchdown. If not, at least got them into overtime. But once again, that missed extra point proved fatal, and it just left the door open enough for Bo Nix to drive down the field to go ahead and steal this win. With this win, the Denver Broncos go up to 5-2. The Chargers lost their game against the Indianapolis Colts, and they have yet to play the Kansas City Chiefs, who are definitely becoming red hot at 4-3. But they are a game ahead of them, and they still have a fairly favorable schedule to go into November. So if they handle business against the Dallas Cowboys, they maintain their lead in the AFC West. And this Broncos team, led by their defense, year 2 of Bo Nix, they feel pretty different. I gotta say, these type of moments do propel you to go on somewhat of a run. I do expect the Broncos to continue to back up this really stellar play that we're seeing so far. All right, let's talk about whatever we saw in Cleveland. The Dolphins come into this game at 1-5. The Browns come in also at 1-5, and somehow Miami is able to make the 2025 Cleveland Browns look like Super Bowl contenders, losing in embarrassing fashion 31-6. This was supposed to be a get-right game for Miami. Instead, it turned into an utter embarrassment. Tua had one of the worst outings of his career, throwing 3 interceptions, including a brutal pick-6 to Tyson Campbell on literally the first play after halftime. This was basically the dagger in the coffin, as after his 3rd interception on the afternoon, Mike McDaniel had seen enough and decided to bench Tua in favor of Quinn Ewers. Meanwhile, give Cleveland credit. Rookie quarterback Dylan Gabriel handled his business, and Quinshon Judkins has become a monster in the Cleveland Browns backfield. 3 rushing touchdowns on the day, punishing Miami's defense all afternoon, and their defense was tenacious, getting in the face of each Miami quarterback as they forced 4 turnovers between both Quinn Ewers and Tua Tagovailoa on an afternoon where they completely stifled Miami's offense. The Browns moved to 2-5, and honestly, they might have found something, as Quinshon Judkins seems to be the centerpiece of their offense. But the real story from this game is the continuing unraveling of the Miami Dolphins. This team is spiraling. After a drama-filled week where Tua essentially throws his teammates under the bus, he followed it up by having one of his worst performances of the season, coming up with a completely dreadful performance, throwing 3 interceptions, bringing his season total to 10. And that ties him with Geno Smith for most interceptions in the league, and that's not exactly company you want to keep. And you can note the tension between Tua and Mike McDaniel is becoming impossible to ignore. You could see the frustration on Mike McDaniel's face after that 3rd interception, and the post-game comments didn't help as McDaniel had a subtle jab saying, "I really hope he doesn't throw 10 interceptions." If that's not just smoke, that's a full-on fire. The ugly truth is that the Miami Dolphins are stuck. Cutting Tua next year would cost them nearly $80 million in dead cap, so unless a miracle trade partner happens to help their financial situation, this football team is a dumpster fire. And the big question is, how does Miami even begin to dig themselves out of this mess? Because right now, it feels like they're a long, long ways away from even playing competitive football. The Dallas Cowboys welcome back All-Pro wide receiver CeeDee Lamb with a 74-yard bomb from Dak Prescott, and it seems to me that Lamb is fully healthy after missing 3 weeks due to a high ankle sprain. George Pickens also continued his recent surge as he had 82 receiving yards on a very aggressive night where the Dallas offense looked lethal. You got great production out of CeeDee Lamb, who had over 100 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns from Jake Ferguson in the red zone, and their defense finally did prove to have a better performance with a pick 6 off of Marcus Mariota. But remember that the competition that Dallas, at least in the secondary, was going up against was not quite NFL caliber receivers, because coming into this game, the Commanders were without Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel. And to make matters worse, they lost Jayden Daniels for the rest of the game, and he's already out for this week's game against the Kansas City Chiefs. But it could miss even more time because the way he went down with that hamstring injury, it did look kind of similar to Lamar Jackson's recent hamstring injury, which Lamar ended up missing 2 games, but he got an extra week to heal because of the bye week. But unfortunately for Jayden Daniels and the Commanders, they don't get that luxury because they're in the thick of their schedule right now. They have the Kansas City Chiefs home, and they play the Seattle Seahawks, who are red hot right now. I mean, I don't think anyone is stopping JSN this season, and Sam Darnold's looking really good. Their schedule heading into November is very, very brutal. And it's one thing to be without your receivers, but without your starting quarterback, and don't get me wrong, Marcus Mariota is decent, but he's no Jayden Daniels at all, and it's unfortunate that Daniels is going to be likely out for a significant amount of time right when the Commanders need him. After receiving a ton of hype heading into this season, they made a lot of moves to acquire veterans, and I think looking back on it, it did kind of set them up for a failure because you gotta continuously bank in on good drafts. They traded some draft picks for Marshawn Lattimore last season. I think it was a 3rd and a 5th. You could have used some of that capital, but you take the veteran, and let's face it, Marshawn Lattimore has not really panned out so far with the Washington Commanders since being traded from New Orleans. You trade for Laramie Tunsil, I think has been playing decent, but I mean, at this point, he is a little bit long in the tooth and not quite an all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber tackle. You bring in Von Miller, who is a veteran, making this one of the more older defenses in the NFL, and couple that in with, unfortunately, the injuries we're seeing with the receivers and now Jayden Daniels. This team has become completely decimated, and it's only a matter of time before, next thing you know, it's 3-4 to maybe 3-7, and you're already planning for the end of the season and next year's draft. But it's really hard because I can't really consider this a year of failure or disappointment because, yes, last season they did have a really good year where they went to the NFC Championship game, but they exceeded expectations, and I think really the biggest thing that they could build off of that is at a minimum return to the playoffs and maybe even win a playoff game. But right now, the way they're looking, they already dropped the game to Dallas. They have to play Philly later on this season, but when they even get to that point, it might be that the damage from the first half of their schedule might be too much to overcome for the Washington Commanders. Let's talk about Victor Wembanyama's opening night statement. Whatever Wemby did with those monks in the offseason, it has already paid big dividends as it seems to have turned him into an absolute monster. Up against rookie phenom Cooper Flagg, who has been getting all the headlines after a really good year out of Duke and obviously was the unanimous number one overall selection. Dallas takes him number one overall. Wemby spoiled Cooper Flagg's much anticipated debut by dropping 40 points, 15 rebounds, also chipping in 3 blocks and having 0 turnovers. Flagg was nothing but an afterthought. He didn't even record a field goal until the second half, and Wemby went meticulously after Anthony Davis, time after time, and completely shredded Davis all night long. Remember, Anthony Davis isn't a scrub. Yes, he's fragile at times. He can get dinged up every now and then, but he's still an elite defender. He's capable of making first-team all-defense. We've seen him do it in years past, and Wemby made him look like a little kid. Anthony Davis, to normal people, I mean, I'm 5'8". Anthony Davis is like 6'10", 6'11". Remember, Victor Wembanyama is supposedly 7'4". I mean, I think you can get away with 7'5" maybe, and then when you factor in his wingspan, just an unreal athlete, and he, like I said, he made Anthony Davis look like a little kid. This is a guy we knew he had the guard-like handle. He can get anywhere on the court thanks to his dribbling ability. He is a two-way superstar. He is great on the offensive side and is an elite rim defender. He would get at least 3-4 blocks a night. But now we're seeing him put it all together. He had a fantastic sequence where he comes up with an emphatic block against Derek Lively and volleyball spikes it to a teammate. They go up the court, and next thing you know, he's taking it through his legs, hits a step back three-pointer in the face of Derek Lively, and knocks in the 4-point play. The NBA should be terrified with how Wemby looks coming into this year, as Wemby is no longer taking basketball for granted after his health scare last season. He himself has stated he wants to add more to his game. Imagine he is a guy at 7'5", just scraping his potential 3 years into his career, and he is an absolute menace on the court, capable of doing anything. I wanted to conclude the podcast with some wholesome content. Sixers rookie VJ Edgecombe has had quite the inspiring journey from shooting basketballs into milk crates to making history in his NBA debut. VJ was born on a small island in the Bahamas called Bimini. Self-described as coming from nothing, as he had to live off of a generator for 7 years, as electricity was hard to get in his area of the Bahamas, particularly growing up as a child. He was raised by strong women as he developed a passion for basketball. His mother didn't have much, but made sure VJ and his siblings had everything that they needed. He was discovered by a coach named Sugar, who sent him into several tournaments across the Bahamas, particularly in Nassau, which is the country's largest city. Unfortunately, Sugar passed when Edgecombe was just 14 years old. But a year later, VJ moves to the United States alongside his brother as they live together in the state of Florida. Eventually, he gets pulled into Team Bahamas as they're in pursuit to qualify for the 2024 Olympics. He began practicing alongside NBA players like DeAndre Ayton, Buddy Hield, and even his future teammate Eric Gordon. He called this good exposure as he had a breakout performance against Finland, scoring 20 points on only 19 shots. He later attended Baylor University and was drafted 3rd overall in the NBA draft, joining the Philadelphia 76ers. In his debut, Edgecombe lit up the Celtics for 34 points, knocking down 5 triples in the process, already matching Ben Simmons' career makes from deep, just 1 game into his career. VJ's performance alongside Tyrese Maxey's 40-point night helped the Sixers beat the Boston Celtics despite a 1-for-9 performance from Joel Embiid. Edgecombe's career is only just getting started, but regardless of how it ends, he's already defied all the odds and is absolutely a winner. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this week's episode of Spectator Sports. Remember, if you want to help this channel grow, reach a broader audience, we are on the grind to 400 subscribers by the end of the calendar year. So if you can do us a massive favor, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get more clips from Spectator Sports, we got that for you here on YouTube and our various playlists, as well as on TikTok. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio-only experience, we got that for you on Spotify. Shout out to Joy for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.